when we really do share our stories, there's a lot of healing that happens.
Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Shafer of Talks with Dr. Shafer. I'm a physician, mom, life coach, musician, author, publisher, and I'm passionate about helping you reclaim your story so that you can build your most beautiful future. Today, I am so excited to have a friend and colleague in the world of kidlit on the show, John Masiulionis. John is the founder of PR from the Heart, which helps children's authors share their stories with the world through heart-centered publicity. And now John has released his first illustrated children's book, Walking Each Other Home, Zachary's Mission, a Hospice for Children. John Masiulionis has the long-term goal of starting a children's hospice in San Diego to help meet the needs of children with life-limiting conditions. John, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure to be here, Shafer. Thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
I am so excited to have you on the show and to talk about what got us here now that you have released your first illustrated children's book, and what brought us to this place along your journey.
It's a fascinating story. So we're taking the time to record this episode in real time, the beginning of the summer of 2025. And it just seems like one of the things that I make a conscious effort to do, just want to share this right off the bat, is, there's times we say that life moves really fast, or just life moves fast. And then it tends to move a little bit faster. It's going to be 5 years. Again, for those who are watching this more or less in real time, it's going to be 5 years in the fall of 2025 since I moved out to San Diego, which is just like unfathomable to believe in many respects. But my journey before being here in San Diego was 2,500 plus miles that way, in that direction, or depending upon where you are in the country, it might be this way, whatever the case might be. But I was born and raised in Buffalo, in Western New York. And if you would have told me that, I knew that from a very early age, I knew that I was meant to help people and to be of service. It's interesting because one of my earliest memories that I can recall when it comes to serving others, I believe my sister may have been in Girl Scouts at the time. And there was some sort of a nursing home Christmas holiday party festivity. And when we were done, opening up the gifts and taking the time to wheel the residents back to their rooms, they ran out of wheelchairs. And I remember I started crying because I had no one to walk home. I had no idea, little John back, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, had no idea that fast forward almost at the age of 44, that this is where I would be in my life. But the world of children's literature, I was in a completely different world in many respects. The world of professional wrestling and sports and entertainment. So I was the host and founder of one of the longest running, most successful wrestling radio shows and podcasts called Monday Night Mayhem. And my wrestling name was the Big Mosh. So in many respects, people liked the Big Mosh because the Big Mosh could do stuff for people. But for a long period of time, I really had struggled with self-love and being kind to myself. And in many respects, there was an alter ego that I had developed because people liked me. And I had a greater chance of connecting to liking the Big Mosh than I did myself. So there were some challenges that I had moved through during the course of my life, especially again when it comes to loving myself, feeling safe, really even wondering if I could eventually move beyond the scope of Buffalo and Western New York. But wrestling in many respects was my safe space. And it's interesting because as the result of my time in the world of professional wrestling, I was given the opportunity to start Monday Night Mayhem in believe it was the early part of 2002, if I'm not mistaken. The college that I went to, Buffalo State University, has an all-talk Monday format. So that meant that students could host their own radio shows ranging from everything to sports, sci-fi, entertainment, health. I chose wrestling. 2002 is a very prominent year for all of your professional wrestling and sports and entertainment fans that are watching Talks with Dr. Shafer and listening to Talks with Dr. Shafer, because TNA Wrestling and Ring of Honor, two of the wrestling companies that are still in existence in different iterations now, first started. So this was before the advent of Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok. I think it was even before MySpace, if I'm not mistaken. Back when you had a wrestling radio show or just a radio show in general, it was tell a friend, tell a friend, tell a friend. And the show grew in popularity over time and transitioned into becoming one of the first wrestling podcasts, to the point where podcasts are now very deemed acceptable. Talks with Dr. Shafer, very, very successful podcast. But 20 some years ago, it was seen as internet radio. And it was almost like the redheaded stepchild. Like, how come your show's not on regular radio? Now people say, how come you don't have a podcast? And, it seems that radio shows to a certain extent can be a dying breed. But during that time, I was very blessed and fortunate. You've had the opportunity to meet this man, Dennis DiPaolo, who is the owner of Elio DiPaolo's Italian restaurant, which is one of the longest running Italian restaurants in the country. It's actually been in existence. It's celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. Dennis's father, Elio, who is a famous professional wrestler, settled down in the Western New York area shortly after he retired to open up a pizza shop because he didn't want anyone to go hungry. Over time, the restaurant grew. It became the official Italian restaurant of the Buffalo Bills, the popular NFL franchise in Western New York. So whenever the Bills celebrated their victories during their Super Bowl years with Jim Kelly and Bruce Smith and Andre Reed and Thurman Thomas, they would go to the restaurant. NFL Hall of Fame quarterback and Buffalo Bills legend Jim Kelly and his wife, Jill, who's a prominent New York Times bestselling author, an advocate for children who, very well-known advocate for children who have special needs as well. They had their reception, I think, Elio DiPaolo's, if I'm not mistaken. And so the restaurant grew in prominence over time, but they've had a long-standing commitment to bettering the lives of children, parents, and families in Western New York. Dennis introduced me to the team at Children's Hospital. Before it was Women and Children's Hospital, before they opened up their new hospital, which became Oshai Children's Hospital. So I was introduced specifically to the Child Life Department at Women's and Children's Hospital. So they actually provide, for those who are unfamiliar with what a Child Life Department is and what they do, they provide emotional support and entertainment for children who are going through very challenging times, whether it be cancer, dialysis, those who are recovering from surgery. So whenever the wrestlers would come into Western New York, whether it be the wrestlers from WWE or TNA Wrestling or Ring of Honor, I would call up the Child Life Department and say, hey, can, X and X wrestler come on in and visit the kids? And so this was really the earliest opportunity that I had to see how my work through PR from the heart and helping children to connect even more through the love and joy of literacy and reading. Again, earliest seeds were being planted back then, and especially with one of my long-term goals of eventually helping to create a hospice for terminally ill children out here in San Diego. So in many respects, even though wrestling gets a bad rap, and unfortunately also I did have the opportunity to see some of the seedy underbelly of the world of professional wrestling and sports entertainment, I go back to that. So even though there was a point in time in my life where I wish that the wrestling chapter didn't happen, if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have been able to meet Dennis DiPaolo, the team at the Child Life Department of Children's Hospital. So when I was doing my wrestling radio show, in many respects, not only did I have the opportunity to serve the community, to be able to raise thousands of dollars for Children's Hospital with and through Dennis, and to be able to really help families in need, but in many respects, tying into my work with PR from the heart, there was almost like a little media machine that I had, because I had to come up with my own press releases and formatting of my shows and interview questions for my guests. But again, I did not necessarily know that, it would take me in that direction, in a completely different direction. But around that point in time, my world was primarily two things. For 10 years, it was my wrestling radio show, and it was also working in the world of collections. Collections is, I'm thankfully at the point in my life right now where I can look back and say, there's something that I learned from every chapter of my life. And I know that collections also gets a bad rap because, yes, I was one of the guys that would call and say, you owe money on your credit card. Simultaneously, I was the one who would, spend 30 minutes on the phone with someone and take a series of $100 checks, knowing the fact that that's what the person could afford. So I really learned about kindness, empathy, and compassion. But my world in many respects was very dense in many respects. And then I started to move through some health challenges beginning around like 2010, 2011. And then shortly after that, my grandmother passed in the summer of 2013. Being part Polish, we refer to our grandmothers as babcia, that's Polish for grandmother. And she was my rock for many years, even though we had a disconnect in terms of my extended family. There were several years that I did not see my grandmother. I had remembered the last time that I had seen her before she ended up passing was when I was starting to move through some health challenges on mine. I needed to get the interior of my car clean, and I needed to be able to have a safe space, a garage where I could steam clean my car. The only person that I really knew that had a big enough garage was my grandparents. And I hadn't seen my grandparents in years. So even though I was moving through some challenging moments in that grand scheme of things, it was almost as if we picked up where we left off. And she said, "Hey, would you like a sandwich? How are things going?" Just, really unconditional love. I truly felt that from her. So in many respects, that's really when, even though my awakening kind of began beforehand, that's really where I began to take stock and reevaluate things in many respects. Already around that particular point in time, I had lost over 100 pounds. So I was at one point in time well north of 300 pounds. I eventually shed over 100 pounds. So Big Mosh was no longer in many respects. So I was really doing my part to take care of myself on a physical level better. But I hadn't had the opportunity to really dive deep with those emotions and feelings. And so I was really given the opportunity in many respects to decide what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And it still took me some time thereafter, because then I was given a diagnosis of testicular cancer. It's actually, from when we're recording this episode, it's almost been 10 years to the day in which I was given that diagnosis. I really feel that was God's way of really telling me that I can learn to love myself, not to necessarily go down any sorts of spiritual rabbit holes, but there are people who do have the belief that depending upon if you have an illness or a sickness or a disease, that there is some form of spiritual component. And what I was really learning over time is that anything tied to what I was moving through was about loving yourself. That's really the best antidote for anything, in addition to whatever treatments or medications, whatever the case might be that you choose to help heal when you're moving through your own awakening, healing journey. And I was given the opportunity to really begin fresh in many respects. And I had to be able to start from ground zero and build my way back up. I knew that there was more to life than just working in collections and doing a wrestling radio show. And so 11 years ago this summer, I actually walked into the Erie County Clerk's office in Western New York, and I said, I want to help people. I want to inspire people. I want to serve people. I want to open up my own PR publicity company. I had already been doing some representation for some prominent life coaches and physicians at that point, kind of just helping them to get their messages out little by little, but I had no idea that it would fully become a PR publicity company. And then I remember, after I was able to take the time to heal on my end, things became increasingly clear that I like to say that my tour of duty in Western New York was beginning to wrap up. I was starting to get very strong premonitions of moving out to Southern California. I didn't necessarily know if it was Los Angeles or San Diego, but for those who have been to San Diego, there's a specific area in San Diego called La Jolla, which in many respects, many people refer to as the jewel of San Diego. I had the opportunity to be in La Jolla 20 years ago, this past spring, actually. So again, we're celebrating some interesting anniversaries here, Shafer. And I was visiting Children's Pool Beach, which is the area where La Jolla Cove meets the Pacific Ocean. Very prominent place that really stuck in my mind and my heart for many years after I left. But I had to be able to move through all of these different sorts of experiences to get to the point where I knew that I could make the move. And so after all of those different things that I had to navigate through, then the pandemic happens. And a lot of people are questioning, like, what's next? What the heck's going on individually and collectively? That's when I made the decision to move. It was the fall of 2020, literally in the heat of the pandemic, so to speak. And I said, now's the time. Because we always tell ourselves that, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And the longer that you tend to wait on something, the more challenging and difficult that it becomes. And so this is before I was very blessed with having a little Shih Tzu Maltese who's going to be celebrating his third birthday this fall. Little Forrest was not in my life at that particular point. It was literally driving cross country, 2,500 plus miles, with a vision and a dream to be able to become a stronger, better, more fulfilled version of myself so I could help, support, inspire, and be at service to people on an even greater level, and to be able to make more of a difference, especially in the lives of children. And yes, the opportunity to eventually help create a children's hospice out here in San Diego. So it's long since been said, Shafer, try to put like a bow on everything, because it's kind of like when people have been asking me about my story, and I try to give them, back in the day, we had a little thing called Cliff Notes. I don't know if kids still use Cliff Notes now. I encourage kids, by the way, to read the full book. Don't do the Cliff Notes. It helps if you're in a jam, right? But if someone asks me about the Cliff Notes version of my life, that's kind of the Cliff Notes version. I've had to move through a lot. It has not been easy. There are many times where I could have given up. I could have thrown in the towel. And I really feel that there's been so many angels that have been walking beside me, because the fact that I am here, that I am living, that I am thriving, that I'm now going to be celebrating 5 years of being out here in San Diego, celebrating the launch of my first children's book after helping and supporting and being of service to children's authors, which I'm continuing to do moving forth from here with and through PR from the Heart. But in many respects, it's a miracle that I'm still here. And I'm very, very grateful, because if I wasn't here, then we wouldn't have had the opportunities to connect, and I wouldn't have had the opportunity to help you share your story with the world. So for those who are just, tuning in to Talks with Dr. Shafer for the first time, I have the blessing and the fortune of helping Dr. Shafer share her new children's book, The Boy and His Brightly Colored Blocks, with children and parents and families across the country and around the world as well, too.
John, and I appreciate you mentioning that. And actually, our connection goes even further back, as we both know, and a lot of our listeners actually know too, because as you know, I can't stop talking about my daughter Amelie and her work and the publishing house that we founded as a family, inspired by the work she was doing, that she wanted to help other children do through Little House of Dreams Publishing. When I was thinking about this conversation today, I really had this full circle moment that you just brought back to my consciousness about the first time you and I spoke. For those of us that are creative and we have these really big goals, big goals are an easy trap to fall into, to then be a non-starter. And you kind of referenced that, right? Like, you knew you needed to move to California and you just had to get that ball in motion. You had to have the momentum to make it happen. And when we were speaking on the phone for the first time after we'd connected, at this point in time, I'm trying to think, maybe a year and a half ago at this point in time. The interesting part was I was sharing my daughter, Amelie Anastasia, the author's mission, which was not just to write books. At that point in time, she had published was just about to publish her third book, Wolf Tales. But it was also to empower other young people to do the same, to share their stories and to have that positive impact on their lives from doing so. And then to build up that mission and that purpose and that business, that publishing house, so that then we could work with children who have life-limiting disorders and conditions, to work with them in their hospital setting so that they have an opportunity to share their stories and have that immortalized for their families, and also just that sense of accomplishment and pride that one has from putting their story on paper. And I remember sharing that with you, and it was this showstopper moment, because you shared with me then, oh my goodness, that's so amazing how that aligns with my own mission and my forthcoming book, and what I hope to do with this book and in the future with creating a hospice for children in San Diego. And so you made me think of reflecting back on that and how there was this similarity with Amelie's goals and my goals through Little House of Dreams Publishing from the beginning, that again was very heart-centered. And as we started off the introduction of you, it's always very important for you to do PR from the heart, as you named your company. Now, looking back at everything that you have outlined for us, and I know, like you said, it's the Cliff Notes, right? It doesn't tell us the messy middle, the nitty-gritty of all the things that have happened over the years. But looking back and reflecting back on your experience losing your grandmother, who was so precious to you, and then going through your own really challenging health scare, how did that inform your journey of then deciding to write this specific story and deciding to put your effort into the dream of creating a children's hospice in San Diego?
It's a very good question, actually, and it's being in touch with my own intuition. And if people will use intuition is a very acceptable term, but some people use the term guidance. Some people will say their heart. Some people will just say, God is telling me to do this. There's truth, I feel, to all of those kinds of things. But when we have a closed heart, when we feel wounded, when we've been hurt, in many respects, there's times where we don't feel safe. And I can share for a fact that I did not feel safe. When I can only speak on behalf of myself. When I did not believe in myself, I could not trust myself. And there were times where I saw all of these amazing people doing such phenomenal things. And there was a tape that was running, not a literal tape, but there was an old story that was saying, like, who are you to do this, that, and the other? Even in many respects, like, I traveled the country, 5 WrestleManias, interviewed the top superstars in all of the world of professional wrestling and sports entertainment. There was even the part of me that said, like, who am I to do this? To the point, again, even though this was back at the origins of the show, it was the big mosh. I had no idea who John Masiulionis was in many respects. And I feel that, like, there was that shift that happened for me probably around 8 or 9 years old, where, like, that's really where I began experiencing more of the pressure and the challenges in life. I don't want to make it seem like my childhood was horrific. In many respects, I'm at a point in my life where I'm grateful for everything, how it went down the way that it did. Simultaneously, don't get me wrong, like, if I could have a do-over with certain things, or if there were some different things that I could have said, maybe can we try to have this happen instead of this? Of course, we all have that throughout the course of our lives. But those specific things, and I share this, we'll talk a little bit more about, like, my actual book during the course of our time together. But one of the strongest points that I share within the story, and when I travel across the country and I speak with grieving families, when I speak with those in the grief community, when I speak with children, parents, families, educators, we all have people that come into our lives. I refer to them as earth angels. There are people that are with us. They can be in our lives for just a glimmer of a moment. They can be there for an extended number of years or decades. But those people, case in point, a Dennis DiPaolo, who, and Little Forrest is another example. He's also told me that he's an earth angel as well, too. The people that help to, in essence, in many respects, lend their confidence in me to be able to say, hey, you know what, feel free to try this on for size. I know that you don't necessarily believe in yourself as much as I believe in you, but you will get to a point where you will be able to believe in yourself that much more. And I learn over time as well that being able to do the things that you say that you're going to do, like, for example, moving cross country, if you would have told me 20 years ago, you're going to move to California, I would have said, like, yeah, that would have been cool, but, like, it's going to be too expensive, and how am I going to support myself, and all those kinds of things. So the things that I landed up feeling that I couldn't do, a large part of me that said that I couldn't do, lose over 100 pounds, start my own business, move to California, write a children's book. I feel that you don't necessarily have, I mean, you can do those things, especially if you're being called to do them. But even if it's a matter of if you write down 3 things that you're going to do today, whatever those 3 things are, and if you look at the end of the day and you said, I did this, and I did this, you're putting more tickets in the trustability bank, so to speak. You're doing your part to be able to, at the end of the day, say, I followed through on this. I can trust myself more because my thoughts, my words, my actions, my follow through, my energy, everything is all in congruence. Everything is all in alignment. And it took me to get to the point of losing my grandmother and telling her that I will fulfill my mission and my purpose. I didn't necessarily know what that was at that particular point in time, because in 2013, I hadn't opened up PR from the Heart yet. I was still living in Western New York. I had just wrapped up my wrestling radio show. I think that was in the fall, that was in the winter of 2013, if I'm not mistaken. But over time, I think that probably, to get even more to the heart of your question, when I was at Children's Hospital with one of the children's authors who I was friends with, and that author had said, and I even am blanking out on her name, she had said, have you thought about writing your own book? And I think, there were probably people over the years that had reminded me, like, you've got a book within you as well, too. But that was the first time where I was really aware. I was attentive, and I was literally listening to what she was sharing. But then again, life's, right? And life gets in the way. And then, of course, I absolutely love helping and supporting and being of service to heart-centered children's authors and spiritual entrepreneurs across the country and around the world. It's fantastic. So I was even having challenges in just carving out that time for myself, for the things that I wanted to do for myself. And that's still something that I'm learning almost now at this particular point in time. That was one of the biggest struggles that I had throughout the course of my whole entire life. But this book that was released this spring is something that, in many respects, I wanted it to be a love letter to all of the people in my, even though, all of the earth angels in the story are inspired by real life people, this in many respects is a love letter to Western New York. It's a love letter to San Diego. It's a love letter to all of those people who have helped to shape me, to mold me. I use the term help to walk me home as well, too, because eventually when you get to a certain point in your life, you understand that it's about the we. Without the we, there is no me. It's important to be able to not lose sight of the me along the way, because then you can't be of service to the greater we. But I think that many of us over the years were really taught that it's just about, you got to make sure that you're taken care of. And to a certain extent, there's obviously some truth to that. But when you go down the rabbit hole of becoming so wrapped up in yourself and in your own ego, then you can't be of service to other people. And we really live in a world right now. I feel that one of the few silver linings that came through the pandemic, Shafer, was the fact that people know if someone is in their heart now. People know if someone is coming from the right perspective, if they're doing things for the right reason. Kind of before the pandemic, I don't know about you, but for me, it was kind of like, I've got to feel this person out. And feeling a person out pre-pandemic could have taken, maybe a couple days, maybe a week, maybe even a few months, so to speak. And I'm not saying that, that we have this instantaneous knowing now, but it's very clear that those people that are meant to be on our path, like obviously Amelie has a very big message that she's sharing. And you probably had thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could have support to share her books? And then the same thing for yourself. And then lo and behold, like I just kind of, not literally, but like I kind of come through the chimney, so to speak. And it's like, hey, here's this John guy. And that's when we're in alignment, when we're following our mission, when we're following our purpose, the right people show up. But I've learned the importance of needing to show up more for myself, especially when it comes to me now traveling across the country, sharing this story, balancing both sharing this book, my book, in addition to doing my PR publicity work and eventually opening up the space to help work on creating a children's hospice in San Diego, it really takes more of cultivating yourself within, developing both inner and outer strength. So it still is something that I am learning each and every day. One of my most favorite spiritual teachers who I really resonate with his work for years is the late Dr. Wayne Dyer. And he had even said, take the time to be a better version of yourself today than who you were yesterday. And I really gravitated to that because many of us will strive for this elusive perfection. And if we can just do our part to be, 1% better, even 0.5% better today than when we were yesterday, then we're trending in the right direction.
Absolutely. And I think working in media and getting to look behind that veil is in a lot of ways very healthy, in the sense that it helps you to see that there truly is no perfection. All of these things that may look perfect on television, it's a team effort. There's no me in entertainment, right? There's literally a me at the end, but it's a team sport. It's a team activity. And it just makes me think, when you share that, it's almost like we're all seeing life as a movie, and we're keeping up with the Joneses. We're falling into the traps of making choices based on, well, what should I do? What does a good life look like? Instead of looking within ourselves and asking, who am I? And what does a good life feel like to me? Because I don't know that life can look or should look a certain way, but I hope that we can get to know ourselves and pay attention to those gut feelings about when life feels that it's in alignment for us, and lean into that. And that's what I'm hearing you say, that you had reached a breaking point where you knew you had to listen to your gut. You knew you had to make some big changes, even though they were frankly scary in some ways. When we think about changing careers, especially when we've been successful in what we've done so far, that can be really scary. But I love you sharing your story of starting such a successful PR firm, because, again, like you said, maybe there are certain chapters you wish you hadn't experienced, but if you hadn't experienced them, would you be where you are now? Would you have those skills? Would you have that knowledge? And what you do now is so important, not only just for your own book that has such an important message, but to support people all over the country in their journey to share their stories, because I really feel that storytelling is the greatest gift. And it's the oldest gift of humanity. We know from looking at cave dwelling drawings. That was storytelling. That was passing on important skills and knowledge. That was the biggest gift. And the gifts weren't tangible. It wasn't something that you could take with you. We didn't have written word then, but we could share our stories and we could teach one another and learn from one another. So I don't think you can underestimate the importance of stories. And children's literature is getting in at the time when our brains, when our minds, our lives are in a place where we can really benefit so greatly from these stories. And if, as you were talking about before, if you're in your 30s, maybe you have children in your life, and you're starting to feel that dissonance, that things aren't in alignment, right? Reading a children's book can be life-changing, not only for the child you're reading it to, but also for you, because of the way that children's books share those concepts and ideas. And there's such beauty in the simplicity and the undertones of the storytelling. I really want to dive into how you decided to structure your book. It's really quite unique in its structure, especially for a children's book, and how you incorporate people from your life that have been very inspiring and important to you. You've already mentioned some of them earlier in our discussion as earth angels who are there to help support and teach lessons to the main character.
This is something, and I really appreciate you asking this question and really framing it in the way in which that you're framing it, because, even though I help children's authors to share their stories, it's a completely different world bringing your book. So I'm obviously familiar with that process, but this has been a giant learning curve in many respects. So, being able to have the contacts that I'm very blessed to have, and being able to work with different television stations and networks and very well-known programs, and work with really amazing people, that's only one aspect. But then there is the framing of the story. And one of the things, just to kind of briefly circle back on, is that in many respects, growing up, I feel that I had my creativity stunted. So one of the things that I needed to do was make peace, or at least start to make peace with that part of me, that 9, 10-year-old me, who had really felt at that point, literally then moving through grammar school, high school, college, into my adult years, that my best wasn't good enough. And that was maybe one of the biggest things that I had to be with, because I can share with full transparency in many respects, I had probably bypassed my emotions and feelings for a long period of time. And I was kind of wondering why I was moving through different experiences, whether it be, physical experiences, whether it be health challenges. And in many respects, when we're not listening to our emotions and feelings, when we're stuffing them down, they express in some way, shape, or form in some capacity down the line, maybe not right then and there. So I share this because in order for Walking Each Other Home, Zachary's mission, a hospice for children, to be birthed into the world, I at least needed to start to be with that. I could not bypass my emotions anymore. I could no longer believe the story. And it's still every day for me, because in many respects, I feel that we all have our own, I don't want to use a term, inner fraud, so to speak, but like, who am I to be doing this? Who am I to be sharing this message, kind of thing, right? And so being able to be with that first things first, in many respects, I feel was a game changer for myself, because then when I said, okay, now's the time, because I also mentioned previously, the longer that you put something off, the more difficult that it becomes. So a little over a year ago, it was a matter of saying, okay, the time really is right. And I was debating about whether or not to go down the traditionally published route. And for those who are familiar with the world of publishing, if you do land up getting an agent and your book gets picked up by a publisher, it can take 3 years, 4 years, sometimes even longer, but minimum at least 2+ for a book to come to form and shape. And I knew that this story needed to get shared, not necessarily from a rushing perspective, but I knew that if I had this book created, that there would be people over time that would say, okay, so you really want to help create a hospice for terminally ill children in San Diego, like, you're really sincere about this, because you actually wrote a book to help, bring this to form and shape. Normally, people will kind of go in a little bit of a different direction, like they might, write the book afterwards, whereas I'm writing the book beforehand. And going back to the whole Earth Angels, this book would not have come to form and shape in the way that it has without the people that helped me along the way. One of the first people that comes to mind is, and she's a very well-known self-published middle grade author, award-winning, Donna Sager-Cowan. She's the creator of the Superhero School series. She was one of the people over the years that said, tell me when your book's coming out. I know you've got this book in you. And I would say, okay, Donna, when the time is right, that kind of thing. So between herself, between and this is in no specific or particular order, by the way, between my two editors, Brooke and Allie, who really helped to see this vision of this story, in addition to Rebecca Yee Peters and her sister Megan, there was this team of like 5 or 6 people that over a span of time really, because I knew what the story was about. I knew how to tell the story in many respects, but taking the idea, the conception, the visualization of the story, and then bringing it into the spoken/written word, completely different. I'm very fortunate that storytelling has been and continues to be one of my gifts. But when it comes to actually putting it down on paper, then it becomes actualized in many respects. And this story, it needed to be shared in a very specific way, because obviously, just to kind of, unpack the story a little bit further, it's about a brave 8-year-old boy named Zachary. Right at the beginning of the story, he's given some very difficult news to process and take in, that being he has terminal cancer. And the name Zachary means so much to me, because going back to my time in the world of Monday Night Mayhem, one of my dearest friends was a gentleman by the name of Zachary Beveridge, who was the first ever street team president that Monday Night Mayhem had. Zachary had actually passed. He was not a child. He was still at a very young age. He was maybe in his late 20s, early 30s when he had passed from a heart condition, I believe, that he didn't even know about. I don't even think that his family knew about. So even when the time came for me to have the main character in the story, who would the little brave boy be? And there was one name that came to mind, which is Zachary. There are the 4 earth angels in the story. There is, of course, Jane, the loving grandmother, which is a nod to my grandmother. There's Dennis, the Italian restaurant owner. There's Georgianne, the animal-loving storyteller, she's a little tip of the cap to Georgianne Irvine, who's one of my dearest friends out here in San Diego. For those who have been to the San Diego Zoo before, you may know who Georgianne is. She's one of the zoo's longest tenured employees. She's also the award-winning creator of the zoo's Hope and Inspiration collection, which chronicles the journey of many of the animals at the zoo who have gone through challenging circumstances, overcome the odds, and moved through to the other side. And so Georgianne, the animal-loving storyteller, and then Patrick, the Reiki master. Patrick really is there is a physical Patrick who helped me in terms of being my Reiki practitioner through the years. That was also an homage to all of the practitioners who helped me over the last 15 years or so really step into becoming the highest and best version of myself, between practitioners, coaches. I mean, I've literally had a whole army of a team in many respects. So to be able to have those earth angels weaved into the story, and even in many respects, there are some slight tips of the cap as well, too. So for example, some of the other smaller characters in the story, there is Dr. Glenn, the chiropractor in San Diego, and there is an actual Dr. Glenn that's here in San Diego. There is Wayne, the beloved audio technician in Pittsburgh. You obviously know who Wayne is because you had the chance to be able to meet him. He actually works at the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in downtown Pittsburgh. So to kind of encapsulate the overarch of the story, Zachary has a dream, and in the dream, after he's given the diagnosis of terminal cancer, God comes to him and says that I have a very important mission for you to fulfill, to help you and your family create and build a hospice for terminally ill children in La Jolla. He sends him these 4 earth angels who help Zachary and his family to not only raise the necessary funds for the hospice, but along the way, they also teach him about the different meanings of unconditional love. And so even if someone may not necessarily classify themselves as spiritual or Christian, there's so many things to take away within the story, because there are people that come into our lives, call them earth angels, call them sources of support, call them inspiration boosters, but they teach us about different things. So Dennis helped Zachary to remember that unconditional love can look like, sound like, and feel like cooking a meal for someone who's hungry, someone in need, to be able to be of service. Even if you're moving through challenging moments, you can actually feel better when you're being of service to other people. Jane, the loving grandmother, helps Zachary to remember that unconditional love can look like, sound like, and feel like spending quality time with the ones that you love. Georgianne helps Zachary to remember that unconditional love can look like, sound like, and feel like helping children to connect to their creativity, their imagination, and their inner spark. And then Patrick helped Zachary to remember that unconditional love can look like, sound like, and feel like simply lifting someone up when they feel down. And so Zachary is elated because his mission is fulfilled. They're able to raise the necessary funds for the hospice. But at the same point in time, now that his mission is complete, he has a sense of completion on his end of things as well, too. He knows that he can pass away peacefully to heaven. So the whole premise of the story is that love never dies, that it only changes form. It's really interesting, Shafer, because in many respects, and I even remember, I didn't even have the chance to mention this, but there was one summer, it was almost 10 years ago, I actually worked as a part-time after-school teacher at an after-school facility in the Western New York area. And I even asked myself, I said, what in the world am I doing here? Like, this is when, like, it was going through some challenging moments in my life. The pay really wasn't that good, but, I had all of these kids that were really looking up to me in many respects. And I even remember one of the grandmothers of one of the students there said, are you a priest? Are you a rabbi? Are you a clergyman? And I kind of like tilted my head a little bit. And then I remembered, well, there is a ministerial component to my work. And this is why, for those who have followed my journey or are just learning about my story, but I mean, in addition to people like my grandmother and Dennis DiPaolo and having an inspiration like Dr. Wayne Dyer, Fred Rogers, and everything that he has taught me, especially through my adult years. Of course, he's the host of the long-running children's television program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I remember watching the program growing up, but I really didn't have this super fun, I remember watching The Neighborhood every day. I remember this episode. For me, it was about the feeling about how Fred made me feel. And especially when I was healing from cancer and after my grandmother had passed away and I was moving through those difficult moments between I'd say 2013 and 2017, maybe even a little bit before that. I would say probably from 2010 through 2017. That was probably the most difficult 7-year stretch of my life. And I remember talking to my grandmother and I said, can you send me a gentle, compassionate, yet strong masculine role model to help me really learn to love myself more, to be kinder to myself so that I can love and be kinder to other people in my life? All of a sudden, Fred Rogers comes down that proverbial chimney once again. This is shortly around the time where the Mr. Rogers documentary came out, directed by the Academy Award-winning filmmaker Morgan Neville, Won't You Be My Neighbor? This was also around the time when the Tom Hanks movie that, of course, talked about Mr. Rogers' life, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, that came into being. And then, of all people, someone who we are very fond of as well, too, David Newell, who played the beloved Mr. McFeely on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He comes into my life, and we fast forward 4+ years, and we actually co-host one of the longest running, most successful podcasts in the world of children's literature, tied specifically into children's book reviews, called the Neighborly Reviews Bookcast. And so it's just interesting how, everything with this story has come full circle. I know that you use the term full circle, and I'm really feeling this, not even just in terms of the anniversary of first being in San Diego 20 years ago, having the cancer diagnosis 10 years ago, moving out to San Diego 5 years ago. The one thing that, if there's one big takeaway of several that I would like your listeners and viewers to take away from this, if I told you the number of people in my life through the years that said, John, relax, have fun. The simplest of things, for whatever reason, either my brain and or nervous system or different parts of my being thought was the most challenging. And we're given this one life to live, not to sound like a coin of soap opera, but we are really given this one life to live in many respects. And it's important to fully enjoy whatever it is that you're doing in the moment. We all have these long-term dreams and desires and goals and ambitions. For me, one of mine is to be able to move out by the water. I'm very fortunate to live where I do in San Diego, but I would really love to be able to be closer to the water, and that'll be happening in about a year or so on my end of things. I feel that one of the biggest things that I meant to do this lifetime is to have a successful relationship and be a loving father. I don't necessarily know what that looks like because that has not yet happened to this particular point in time, but I feel that that is one of the biggest purposes in my life. And I feel that we can be so hard on ourselves and so abrasive and so judgmental on ourselves to say, how come this hasn't happened yet? Like I was just kind of learning. Well, it's not really learning, but with having the chance to go back to Western New York for my national book tour recently, and seeing how people that I went to high school with have kids that are in their teens. There's the part of me that's like, one, where did the time go? And then there's the part of me that says, like, I kind of felt a little like, well, they're further along than me. And I kind of had to move through that because everyone's exactly right where they need to be in their lives. There's no rushing. But again, life tells us in some way, shape, or form that we have to, have the first big job, have the first big career break, get married, have kids, all by a certain age. Right. And so I have been very blessed and fortunate to kind of encapsulate things with the book and everything in my life, that I've been able to experience these blessings and life lessons along the way, so that the timing is that much more aligned, and being able to reconnect with my inner child and to take the time to become a stronger and better version of myself, and to truly be the best man, human being, soul that I know that I can be. I know that I have the opportunity to be a better father whenever that time happens, versus if that would have happened 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And I'm sure it all would have worked itself out the way that it was meant to. But this is why, again, like having the opportunity to share this story right now. And I still find myself, I don't even really, I still probably haven't connected to the feeling of how blessed I really am. Like that's something that I'm really starting to do this summer. I'm really taking stock this summer, and not even just enjoying life more, but to really realize, like, look at how far that I've come. And I encourage all of your listeners and your viewers, while they're still chasing the dream and wanting this happen and wanting that happen, to really just take stock of where they are right now, everything that you've overcome, everything that you've moved through, and just really take the time to celebrate where you are right now in this moment, while also celebrating life at the same point in time.
I so appreciate you sharing that. And I'm a very visual listener as you're speaking. Sometimes little thought bubbles and images will pop up. And I'm just imagining the sensation of creating the goals, because I know you and I are both very similar in the sense that we're very goal oriented, and we are go, go, go. When we're touring for books, you can be in a city for 22 hours and that's just normal. And every hour of that day you've packed with as much as you can, enriching activities to help promote your book, do the things you need to do for your business, make sure that you are supporting the people who are enjoying your book, reaching out to those families and readers. And it's so easy to get wrapped up in that goal-oriented checklist way of living life. And the question I pose to you and to everyone who's listening is, have you made it a part of your daily checklist, if you're a checklister, to make it a goal to enjoy that day, to cherish those moments, and to really live them, not just check the box and move on, which is so easy to do?
Now, yes. Now, this is something that it is. I don't really want to. I feel that if we can condition ourselves to believe that something is a struggle if we keep saying something is a struggle. Don't feel it's as much of a struggle for me as it used to be. But with the large part of me that loves being of service to other people and making sure that everyone else is okay, just being a natural born empath on my end of things, it's important for me to be able to, and this is why one of the reasons a dear friend and colleague of mine over the years, I forget when he first told me this, but he gave me kind of some little homework. He said, I want you to go to Home Depot. And I'm like, all right, sounds cool. He says, I want you to get a bucket. And I'm like, all right, what am I going to be doing? Mopping the floor? He's like, well, it's important to mop the floor, but Some people will have like gratitude jars. I want you to get a victory bucket. And I'm like, all right. So here I am, go to the Home Depot, right near my residence here in San Diego. And I find this orange bucket. Traditionally, buckets are white or gray or black. I'm like, no, we need something with flair and pizzazz. We're going orange bucket. And so I have a victory bucket. And every day I try to write at least. And sometimes there's days where I forget or I'm moving through the whatever and I just don't put anything in for a few days. But it's a matter of doing my part to at least put something in that victory bucket every day. But not just have that be as a thing on the to-do list. Because for me, for years, I treated self-care like a thing on the to-do list. Instead of, enjoying that walk or, enjoying a sea salt bath or watching the sunset or listening to some meditative music, it was a matter of just writing the thing down that I needed to do, and it was checking a box. And this is why this is a story that I have not shared publicly yet. So you might be, I'll probably be sharing this at some point in time on social media. But when I was on tour, I had the chance to meet a dying woman by the name of Lynn. This is when I was in Rochester. And I was I technically should have been out of the store and wrapping up because it was the last day that I was in the Buffalo, Western New York, and Rochester. And I was quite tired. That was a very long week of, 5 television interviews, 2 radio interviews, 1 newspaper interview, 5 successful events, and 35 hours of sleep or less within 1 week equals 1 tired day. But there was this woman who came to me and she was in a wheelchair. We ended up striking up a conversation. Her name is Lynn. And she was an educator for many years. She even said, the last thing that I wanted to do was be an educator. All of a sudden, God wanted me to be an educator. She was telling me how she was given a diagnosis of terminal kidney cancer. And she was very forthright in saying that she didn't have a lot of time left. And she was really taking stock of her life. She was trying to keep her spirits high. She went to Barnes and Noble to get a puzzle because I think she was also moving through some sort of like dementia, Alzheimer's, and she's trying to keep the mental faculties in check. But she also had said, I haven't been at this Barnes and Noble in a long period of time. There's a part of me that was wondering, even why am I here besides getting this puzzle? And we strike up the conversation, and I share with her about the story about my grandmother and bring this book to form and shape. And I told her, because this is something that through prayer and meditation that I've been speaking with my grandmother, I'd say over the past year or so, I've asked my grandmother for more time here, more time to enjoy life, more time to create treasured memories and moments before I rejoin her. And I could sense that Lynn was moving through maybe some fear to a certain extent, even though her faith is very strong, very strong. And I told her, I says, if you're moving through any fear about getting ready to cross over to transition, I says, I want you to call on my grandmother. I want you to call on Jane. I want you to call on Babcha. And she says, and if you've ever had conversations, if your listeners and viewers have ever had conversations where there is a room of people, but you're talking to one person, it's like no one else is in the room. It's just you and that person. It's almost kind of like this Martin Scorsese, what in the heck thing is happening between these two people. And she said, I will communicate with your grandmother. And also when I go to heaven, I will look for your grandmother. And I will tell her that you've asked for more time. There's the part of me that's like, wow. And I still am feeling into that moment, because just during the whole experience of being in Western New York, there were different people that I had the chance to reconnect with. My second grade teacher, Mrs. Peterson. I had the QA specialist of one of the collection agencies that I worked at. My first co-host, Charles Turner, with Monday Night Mayhem. I had someone that was a representation of one of my high school teachers, a Mary Kay Pozluzny at St. Mary's in Lancaster. I had someone representing each of the different chapters of my life. And I felt that was my way of literally connecting with that different part of my being, my inner child me, my high school me, my college me, my wrestling radio show me, all these different parts of me where I could say, and also my grammar school music teacher and confirmation sponsor, Mr. Contafio, as well too. It was my way of saying thank you to those people, thank you to those experiences, and really no longer seeing myself as broken. Because for the longest period of time, even in the midst of me running my PR publicity company, I felt broken. I felt shattered in many respects. And I remember going to my grandmother's gravesite shortly after this experience with Lynn, and I was talking with my grandmother, and I said, I don't feel broken anymore. And so this goes back to your question about, and your share about just being with whatever it is that you're being with, experiencing whatever it is that you're experiencing, taking stock of where it is that you are in this moment, enjoying the time, not just during the summer, because the summer is when there is the long summer nights, the temperature is warmer, we have more free time to be able to enjoy things traditionally. And then all of a sudden it's, for like you and me, it's the back to school season. And for me already right now, I'm already in my back to school season. But life is way too short. Even though I never really was a big fan of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Ferris Bueller was a very wise soul when he said in his own iteration, like, really enjoy life, because if you just fast forward through life, you're going to miss some pretty cool stuff along the way. So this is why, again, I'm doing my part to, like, I'm reintegrating to a similar exercise routine that I had when I had lost 100 pounds a little over 10 plus years ago, 12 years ago, 13 years ago. So some of the things that I have been either not necessarily doing fully or putting off completely, I'm doing my part so that I can create that more time, because we all want to have long lives. There's a difference between having a long life and a long, healthy, enjoyable, abundant life. That's the life that I'm choosing. And it took me a while to break free from a lot of old conditioning and older beliefs and older storylines, bloodline, generational kind of things, not to go down different spiritual rabbit holes when I share that, but I'm very fortunate. I'm very fortunate to be here, to be able to share my story, because this is probably a beautiful arc for us to begin to put a bow on our conversation. When we really do share our stories, there's a lot of healing that happens. And knowing the fact that there's grieving families that have lost, that is something that I have never experienced, that hopefully with the grace of God, I will never have to experience. But channeling my pain that I experienced and still do feel and carry with me to a certain extent with my grandmother passing away, and knowing the fact that I've transformed that into my purpose and my passion to be able to help grieving families, and to really just especially remind children and parents and families and educators. I always go back to the end of an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And had I been more aware and more present when I was a child, and I actually believed Fred Rogers' words, in his own way, shape, and form, he said, I like you and I love you just the way that you are, that you're loved, you're special, you're whole, you're healthy, you're complete, that I like you, that I love you just the way that you are. That's something that I'm doing my part to tell myself more each and every day, and to literally, there's a difference between just saying it. Sometimes we have to fake it until we make it, but to also really breathe into that and to be with that, because then eventually we'll get to that point where we really do believe that it'll just become a regular way of life, a regular way of being for ourselves. The last thing that I want to mention, Shafer, and this is one of the reasons why I not only love helping you to share your story, you've coined in many respects the term the messy middle. And in many respects, we all try to put on brave fronts, right? And when you go on social media and you see all these people doing all of these amazing things, and sometimes you might wonder, like, are people even struggling, right? Because sometimes we just tend to share like the really good stuff on social media. And in many respects, you're helping people to embrace their imperfections. I don't know if it's in Japan, but there's some sort of an art that I'm just learning about where like you take the broken pieces and you fill it in with gold. I forget what this form of artwork actually is, but it's just like you're really helping people to realize that they're not broken. And that's really needed now more than ever before because we all have missions and purposes. It doesn't have to be to help create a children's hospice in San Diego. It doesn't necessarily need to be a mom or dad or to open up your own business. Your mission, your purpose might just be to love yourself more than you've ever loved yourself at any given point in time before. And if we can take the time to be with our messy middle and to embrace our imperfections and know the fact that we're not broken, and that we really can become stronger, more creative, more whole versions of our being while embracing where we are in that moment, I feel that the world can be even more of a better place just by starting with that.
John, thank you so much for sharing everything that you have shared so generously with such vulnerability and love on today's episode. I so appreciate that. And I appreciate the fact that we both live in that messy middle from time to time. We all do. And when we share that messy middle, we normalize it and we do help people see that they're not broken, they're building. And there is no building without some reconfiguration. We're not going to get it right the first time. And had you got it right the first time and stayed in the wrestling world of radio, we wouldn't have John's amazing PR from the Heart firm. We wouldn't have your book, right? So there is breaking that is required for the building of our lives. And I'm so appreciative to have you as a part of my life and my daughter's life and helping us share our stories and all of the wonderful friends that I have met that you are helping with their stories as well. I want to really focus in on the importance of the topic of your book and just share a few statistics about in the United States. It is estimated that 500,000 children will experience life-limiting conditions each year, and about 10% of them will die, unfortunately, every year. Of the around 40,000 children who pass away from life-limiting conditions in the United States each year, about a third have access to pediatric hospice or end-of-life care, which is such an important resource for patients and their families and their communities. And that is why that is such an important topic. And I'm so grateful that you are here today with us to share your mission for creating a children's hospice in San Diego, your book that helps to promote why we need to talk about this really difficult topic. Because when something's in the light, we can start to take the steps to support our children and families that are coping with this unthinkable tragedy, to help them make the most of their time. Because as we've talked about a lot today in our conversation, we don't know how much time we have. We want to spend it being true to ourselves, being fulfilled and living a big, beautiful, happy life. And children who are in the position where they do have a terminal illness, they need our support so that they can continue to do that in their final moments. And so I so appreciate you taking on this important issue with your book and all of the work you're doing to discuss this across the country in support of Zachary's mission. John, how can our listeners connect with you if they have a book that they would love to promote to share with the world, or if they want to learn more about your mission and your book? What's the best way for our audience to get in touch with you?
So there's 2 series of social media platforms. One is tied, of course, into my new children's book, Walking Each Other Home, Zachary's Mission, Hospice for Children. You can head on over to my official website. I like to try to keep things simple, as you know, so johnmasiulionis.com. You can also follow my journey on social media, still continuing my national book media tour in the process. So Facebook and Instagram and X, all at John Masiulionis. And then If you are a children's author, if you're a middle grade author, even if you're a spiritual entrepreneur, I've had the very good fortune over the years of being of support to inspirational spiritual authors and even poets who actually write their own poetry books as well too. As we've shared throughout the course of our conversation today, when we take the time to share our stories, there's more healing that happens not only on an individual level, but also on a collective level. And as this summer, as I am sharing as I will be going into the 12th year of service with PR from the Heart, authors can connect with me via my official website, which is prfromtheheart.com. Also on social media, you can stay connected to learn more about all of the amazing children's authors that I have the blessing of representing, including Dr. Shafer, of course, in addition to Shafer's fantastic daughter, Amelie Anastasia, who is doing incredible work fulfilling her mission and her purpose at a very young age as well, too. And I just want to thank you for this opportunity as well, Shafer, because this is one of the things that this is also going to nod back to my grandmother. When I was moving through those challenging moments in my life, and when it didn't look like that I had a lot to be grateful for, what I felt that she was communicating through me and telling to me was, when you take the time to be grateful for what you have, you will have more to be grateful for. And when someone gives you their time, their attention, their platform to be able to share more about yourself, to share from your heart what it is that you are doing to make the world a better place, and also your mission and your purpose, that's an incredible blessing. Nothing in life is guaranteed. Everything very much is a gift. So the opportunity to be on your show very much is a gift. So I'm looking forward to seeing where our journeys continue to go moving forth from here. And again, I really do appreciate the opportunity to not only be in your life and to be in the life of your daughter and your family, and to be able to help you share your respective stories, but for really helping to be a light in my life as well too, and to help me share my story with your listeners and viewers as well too. It really means a lot.
John, this has been such a lovely conversation, and it's really a unique one. I love having people on the show that you're not just meeting and that you do have this shared history with, because it's almost like inviting listeners to sit at your dinner table. And I think that's actually such a lovely thing to be able to do, to witness these conversations and kind of have a behind the scenes look. And so I so appreciate you sharing your story with us and just sharing the journey with me and with Amelie, of course. I do want to send a shout out to Wayne. You mentioned him earlier, and I wanted to give him a special shout out because he is just such a lovely person, and I'm so tickled that he's in the book. I really enjoyed meeting him when I was on PR from the Heart's 48th episode and 4th anniversary special. And listeners, please go to YouTube, follow PR from the Heart there, and you can listen to John and my conversation also with the wonderful David Newell, aka also known as Mr. McFeely. So please join us for that conversation too. It was a lot of fun, and you can learn even more about John and his story and his journey there. Storytellers, thank you so much for being here. And John, thank you so much again. This has been a wonderful shared experience. Until next time, as always, stay safe and take care. I'll talk to you soon.